Under the olive tree knits, how to work the Picot Bind-Off. In this video I'm going to show you how to work the Picot Bind-Off as used here in the shallow Tide Shawl. This bind-off gives a pretty and decorative edge to your knitting, and while it does take a bit longer than other bind-offs, I'm sure you'll agree the results are worth it. For the purposes of this tutorial, I've knitted a small stockinette swatch which I'm going to bind off. If you are knitting the shallow Tide Shawl, you'll be binding off after a section of reverse stockinette, but as I say, I'll be binding off in stockinette for this tutorial. So let's get started. First of all, we're going to knit the first 2 stitches. Then we're going to lift the first stitch over the second stitch to bind 1 stitch off. Next, slip that remaining single stitch back to the left hand needle purlwise. Then, using a knitted cast on 3 stitches. You will now have a cluster of 4 stitches at the tip of the left hand needle. Now we're going to bind off 5 stitches. One, 2, 3, and the last 2 bind off stitches are going to use the next 2 stitches on the left hand needle. 4, and 5. And there you can see we have our first picot of the bind off. Let's do the next one. Slip the single stitch back to the left hand needle purlwise. Then, using a knitted cast on 3 stitches. Next, bind off 5 stitches. And that's the second picot done. For each picot you are going to continue slipping the remaining stitch back to the left hand needle purlwise, then using a knitted cast on 3 stitches, and then bind off 5 stitches. So repeat these 3 steps until there are no more stitches left to bind off. Once you get to the end, cut your yarn and then pull it through the final stitch to close. And there you have your Picot Bind-Off. So if you wanted a larger gap between the picots, you can bind off more stitches in between them. For example, instead of binding off 5 stitches, you could do 6, 7 or 8 and just have a bigger space between them. When it comes to blocking the bind off, here I've just washed my swatch and used blocking wires to set out the straight edges. Now I'm going to pin out the picot edge. So you'll see here that the Picot Bind-Off has lace holes, and these can really be opened out when blocking. Using rust-proof pins, I'm just going to open up each picot by pinning into the top of the lace holes. Once they are all pinned out, you can leave your project to dry. Once dry, you can remove the pins and you'll see that the picots have retained that lovely open lace. And there you have it, a pretty Picot Bind-Off.